Before whales, before dolphins, even before the megalodon. Yes, I'm talking about the same shark that everyone loves to talk about. Before any of those existed, the ocean was already full of monsters. Not the kind of monsters we make up or the ones from movies. Real-life monsters that existed left their bones behind, and humans have struggled to explain them for so long. I'm talking about fish, but not the type you eat at a fancy restaurant. Fish that is from a version of a planet that is so different from ours. But these animals are not aliens. They didn't appear and disappear in some brief, weird moment of evolutionary chaos. Most of these fish survived the Devonian period. Now, if you don't know about the Devonian period, just know that scientists call that period the Age of Fishes, and it lasted from about 419 to 359 million years ago. That is 60 million years. For context, the entire history of modern humans on this planet is roughly 300,000 years. These fish, on the other hand, had 60 million years to grow, to evolve, to get larger and stranger and more perfectly engineered for an ocean that had completely different rules. And they used every single one of those years extremely well. Some became armored tanks, some evolved jaws that looked built to crush bone, some grew so large that early scientists thought their fossils belonged to dinosaurs. Safe to say, every one of them looked scary. And today, we are going through 5 of them. I should warn you that they get bigger and stranger as we go, and every single one of them is going to make the one before it feel reasonable. You may be asking at this point, what sort of ocean produces animals like this? The simple answer is not the ones we have now. You see, during the Devonian period, Earth was genuinely warmer than it is today. There was limited evidence of polar ice caps, and the climate across most of the planet was described as warm and equitable. Also, by the time of the Jurassic, when some of the giants on this list were swimming, global sea levels were dramatically higher, and it was kept that way by a world too warm to form large ice caps. Simply put, the continents back then looked nothing like what you'd find on a map today. The ocean covered more of the planet, and in that warmer, shallower, more nutrient-soaked water, fishes were not just surviving, they were thriving. As a result of this, the ocean became filled with lots of planktonic microorganisms in the free water column. And more plankton meant more food, and more food meant more competition, predators, pressure to evolve faster, grow bigger, and develop better weapons. But if food was everywhere, why did these animals still need to become monsters? Why compete for food? Why grow armor thick enough to stop attacks? Why evolve jaws powerful enough to crush bone? Why become larger than anything the oceans had ever seen? Well, the answer is not because there was food all around, it's just that evolution made them violent. That is not supposed to make sense, but let me explain. Normally, when prey gets faster, predators get faster. When predators get stronger, prey grow armor. When armor gets thicker, jaws get more powerful. When jaws get more powerful, prey grows bigger, because at a certain size, nothing can touch you anymore. So the presence of food everywhere fueled the prey, giving them more energy to grow, and that growth came with competition. This is the origin of the predators with jaws that made the great white look like a minor inconvenience. But just how big and scary were these creatures? Let's take a look at the first one. Now imagine a fish that has been on this planet for 400 million years. This same fish has survived every mass extinction, every asteroid, and every time the ocean completely changed around it. What does that tell you about how this fish was built? The fish I am talking about is the coelacanths. It first appeared roughly 400 million years ago during the Devonian period and was abundant across most of the world. They survived the extinction that wiped out the dinosaurs. Scientists call them living fossils, and when you actually see one, you understand why immediately. You see, the modern coelacanth has 4 limb-like fins that move in an alternating pattern, front left with back right, front right with back left, exactly the way 4-legged animals walk on land. Yes, you heard that right. The coelacanth doesn't just swim in water, it walks through water. And it did this at a time when most land animals didn't even have that ability. This walking creature in the ocean was obviously massive. But the one that is alive today, the one that shocked the entire scientific world when it was rediscovered in 1938, is small. It's about 1.5 meters. So what happened when that same body plan had 100 million more years to grow? The answer to that question is the Mawsonia. It lived in freshwater and brackish environments from the late Jurassic to the mid-Cretaceous, roughly 152 to 96 million years ago. They could be found across South America, Africa, and North America. So cool. The Mawsonia could walk in water, it was 6 meters in length, and it survived in a time when food was everywhere. So if it was so tough, what was it afraid of? When it was fully grown, Mawsonia likely had very few predators, but the few it did have were more terrifying. And I bet it wished it had smaller, but plenty more than the ones it did have. Some of its prey were larger sharks and pliosaurs, but the Mawsonia's main problem was the Spinosaurus. And the Spinosaurus was not a fish. It was a predatory dinosaur. If it were a dinosaur, it should not make sense that it was haunting a fish in water. But that was exactly what happened. Let me explain. The Spinosaurus used to stand on land, but occasionally it would reach into the water, and when it did, everything in that river became prey, including a 6-meter-long fish. The dinosaur came with robust jaws, and it featured small dome-shaped teeth with heavy wear patterns consistent with a diet of hard-shelled prey like crustaceans and mollusks. It never chased its prey. All it did was to cruise slowly across the bottom and then crush whatever it found. The only reason we even know about this is that most of this comes from skull bones alone. Skull bones are preserved because of their exceptional density and ornamentation, the only parts hard enough to survive over 90 million years underground. We are piecing this animal together from fragments, from the parts that refused to disappear. And honestly, that feels appropriate, because the Mawsonia itself refused to disappear. But this was only the beginning, because the next fish on this list isn't prehistoric, it's alive. It's in your ocean right now, and the first time most people see one, they genuinely do not believe it's a real animal. Okay, I need to describe something to you, and I need you to just bear with me. Take a fish. A normal fish. Now remove the tail, not trim it, remove it. Now inflate the body until it's roughly the size and shape of a giant coin. Give it 2 enormous fins, one on the top and one on the bottom, that it uses to sort of flap through the water like a very confused bird. Give it a tiny beak mouth that it can't even fully close, and make it weigh over 2.5 tons. That is the real animal, and it's called the ocean sunfish. If you ask me, the ocean sunfish resembles a fish head with no tail. Its main body is flattened laterally. It has no real caudal fin. It's just a rounded, scalloped stub called a clavus where the tail should be. The Germans call it schwimmender Kopf, simply put, swimming head. And the Polish call it head alone, because that is genuinely what it looks like, a massive, flat head drifting through open water, seemingly without explanation or destination. And the size is something that you are not ready to hear. The heaviest specimen ever recorded was found near the Azores in December 2021. It weighed 2,744 kilograms, over 6,000 pounds, and measured over 3.25 meters long. It is heavier than a white rhinoceros. It is also heavier than most cars, and this is not a prehistoric animal. It is an animal that exists today in an ocean you could theoretically swim in. And believe me, that doesn't unsettle me. What does is the fact that the sunfish hatches from a very tiny egg, and by the time it reaches full size, it has increased its body weight by approximately 60 million times. That is the equivalent of a 1-gram tadpole becoming a 60-ton frog. The question is how? What does something eat to be able to grow 60 million times its birth weight? The answer is jellyfish. That's right, this 6,000-pound, biologically impossible, swimming head of a fish built itself into the largest bony fish alive by eating jellyfish. Low-calorie, mostly water, jellyfish. And it gets stranger because it has no swim bladder. Its skeleton is largely cartilaginous. Its skin is up to 7.3 centimeters thick. Its teeth are fused into a beak that it cannot fully close. It is structurally and biologically wrong in almost every direction a fish can be wrong. Scientists at the Monterey Bay Aquarium described it as looking like the invention of a mad scientist. And I think that's being polite. No doubt the sunfish is the strangest giant alive today. But if this is what the modern ocean produces, what exactly was the prehistoric ocean building? So far, everything we have talked about has been in the ocean. And the ocean is an open water which is vast, deep and endless. In the ocean, having room to grow makes a certain kind of sense. But what happens when you take that same evolutionary pressure, that same arms race, and you compress it into a river? What does evolution build when the water is dark, shallow, enclosed, and there is absolutely nowhere to run? Well, you get the Rhizodus hiberti, and I can assure you right now, nothing about this is going to feel like a river fish. You see, about 330 million years ago, the swamps and rivers of what is now Europe were home to an animal nearly 7 meters long, the largest freshwater predatory fish to ever exist. But if it was truly 7 meters long in a river, what exactly was it eating? Because a 7-meter predator in a freshwater system needs a lot of food. And the answer is, well, disturbing. This fish was eating early land animals. Before you call me a liar for saying that it left the sea animals and went to the land animals, allow me to explain. The Rhizodus hiberti was smart. It didn't target creatures that had mastered how to use their legs. It targeted the giant amphibians, creatures that had just figured out how legs worked, some of them approaching 6 meters themselves. That was what was on the Rhizodus menu. These animals had literally just evolved the ability to walk on land and were being pulled back into the water by something that never needed to leave it. But here is where it gets worse. At the front of its jaws, Rhizodus had 2 fangs, each one 22 centimeters long. That is basically the length of your forearm from wrist to elbow. This fish had 2 of them at the front of its mouth like a pair of biological daggers. And behind those 2 fangs was a full set of smaller, equally sharp teeth descending in size all the way back into its jaw. It wasn't built to swallow things whole, it was built to bite, to clamp down, rip and tear, the way a crocodile works, but in a fish the size of a great white shark. So you have a 7-meter fish in a river with 4-arm-length fangs, hunting animals that thought they'd escaped the water by growing legs. But honestly, can you blame Rhizodus? The water was its world. These land animals were just wandering too close to the edge, but at least Rhizodus was still a predator. It still had to hunt and work for its food. Some fish on this list didn't bother with any of that. Then some fish became too large to even hunt. For the longest time, we have believed that the ability of the largest animal alive today, the blue whale, was a modern invention. That it couldn't hunt, couldn't chase, but just open its mouth, swim forward, and filter millions of tiny organisms out of the water. We believed that it was something that evolved after the dinosaurs died and the mammals took over the ocean. But we were wrong, by about 100 million years. Filter feeding didn't begin with whales, it began with fish. Enormous, toothless, slow-moving fish that were doing exactly what blue whales do today, roughly 100 million years before whales even existed. These fish are called Bonerichthys, and pay attention to where it lived. It lived in the shallow inland sea that covered what is now Kansas during the late Cretaceous, the same time dinosaurs were walking on land directly above it. This enormous, toothless animal with a permanently open mouth lined with gill rakers was cruising slowly through the water, straining out everything small enough to catch. It reached at least 5 to 6 meters long. It was the size of a great white shark, but it was built nothing like one. Because where the great white is tight muscle and controlled aggression, Bonerichthys was wide, slow, and almost peaceful. It was just moving through the water with its mouth open as the ocean owed it a meal. But something very strange happened to it 66 million years ago. It was around the same time the asteroid hit, and everything collapsed. When everyone recovered, the Bonerichthys had disappeared, and with it, the entire ecological role of the giant filter feeder just vanished. For millions of years after the extinction, that niche sat empty until whales evolved to fill it. And this raises a question that nobody really has a clean answer to. If Bonerichthys had survived, if the asteroid had missed by just a few degrees, would whales have ever needed to exist at all? Would the ocean have just kept running on ancient fish? We don't know, and we'll never know. But what we do know is that none of these animals, not Rhizodus, not Bonarichthys, not anything we've covered, comes close to what is next. Most people call it the true giant. So far, we've had armoured killers, fanged river monsters, a leviathan that swam with its mouth permanently open, eating nothing but plankton. And then there's this, Leedsichthys problematicus, a fish from the Jurassic period about 165 million years ago. And if its name Problematicus doesn't tell you that this is the type of creature that is trouble just swimming around, I don't know what else will. But that wasn't the reason the scientists gave it that name. What happened was that the scientists who first tried to reconstruct it were so confused by the fossil fragments, so completely unable to make the pieces fit, that they named it after the problem of figuring out what it was. So far, no complete skeleton has ever been found. Much of its body was made of cartilage, which doesn't fossilize. What we do have are fragments, pieces of something so large that when they were first dug up in England in the 1880s, scientists initially mistook the bones for parts of a stegosaurus. Yes, they thought they were looking at a dinosaur because the bones of this fish, if I can even call it that, were just that big. Current estimates, however, place it at up to 16 meters long, roughly the length of 2 double-decker buses end to end, and potentially up to 45 tons. That is heavier than 6 African elephants. Imagine a fish being heavier than 6 African elephants. And not even a predatory fish, a filter-feeding fish that ate nothing but plankton and microscopic organisms, cruising slowly through the warm Jurassic seas with its enormous mouth open, straining the water the way a blue whale does today. And that isn't even the strangest part. You see, scientists still aren't sure how large it actually got. The estimates have swung between 9 meters and over 27 meters across different studies. The fossil record is too incomplete, too fragmented, too broken to give a definitive answer. We have been digging up this animal for over a century. And we still don't know how big it was. Scientists still don't know how large it truly became. And to me, what I don't know how large it is pretty terrifying. But let me know what you think of these fish. Which one shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe. It goes a long way in telling YouTube that I am doing a good job.